So here we have Paris, Texas, a film about a deadbeat parent attempting to re-enter the lives he destroyed after his own insecurities and paranoia over his wife's supposed infidelity spiraled into violent obsession and control, leaving him estranged from his family and a shell of his former self. This film was directed by Wim Wenders, one of those directors whose names you usually hear right before someone complains of how slow the pacing is before telling you to stick with it. He emerged from the 1970s New German cinema movement and became known for making films about people drifting through unfamiliar places. A lot of his most well-known work revolves around travel, such as Alice in the Cities, Kings of the Road, Wrong Move, and of course, Paris, Texas. Stylistically, in these road films, he often favors using long takes, minimal dialogue, and heavy reliance on landscape to communicate emotion. Paris, Texas is filled with open deserts, empty highways, and cheap motels, environments that quietly make you feel isolated. The atmosphere is a perfect physical reflection of the protagonist's mental state. A balance of vast empty spaces contrasted with the tight enclosed space where he finally confronts his guilt. Initially, Paris, Texas may seem like any other southwestern road trip movie set in some podunk town, but really, it functions as a slow burn character study. Sam Shepard and Ellen Kit Carson's writing is what gives the movie its emotional pull. Characters speak in these sparse, short sentences, often evading what they're truly meaning to say. When an actual conversation is finally had, like in the final booth monologue, it comes out in a long confessional style burst, the way suppressed guilt tends to do. What makes this film unique is that it tells the story of the aftermath of abuse from the perspective of the person who caused it, forcing us to sit with the irreversible cost of his actions. Rather than portraying the protagonist, Travis, as a constant aggressor as the story unfolds, we meet him in a state of total detachment, living with the consequences of what he's done. This is a film about the desire to reclaim the past and the tragic realization that some things, once broken, can't be restored. When he does later attempt to reconnect with his wife for the first time, he catches himself slipping back into the same aggressive pattern that ruined their relationship in the first place. At that point, he seemed to accept that change may be impossible for him. When we first meet Travis, he had been wandering in the desert for the past 4 years. He's buried himself so deeply in detachment that he can't seem to confront his actions or assimilate back into normal life. He chooses a nomadic existence, unable to even speak, walking without direction because he's only able to protect the people he once loved through isolating himself. Alone in the desert, everyone was safe. There's no one to harm and no one who can trigger him. However, this desert wandering puts him in extreme physical danger constantly. It's only when he passes out from dehydration that he gets identified through the ID in his wallet and his family is finally contacted about his whereabouts. In a sense, his return home was forced. If he never passed out, his brother may have never found him and continued to assume he was dead. And the film subtly suggests that this was probably the least harmful outcome. The moment he's dragged into resuming his responsibilities as a brother and a father, we watch an uneasy emotional re-engagement unfold. He reluctantly returns to Los Angeles, where his brother Walt and his wife Anne have been raising his son Hunter since the age of 3. Hunter has no memory of Travis or his mother Jane. Travis understands that to Hunter, he was practically a stranger, which makes re-entering his life after 4 years predictably awkward for both of them. Rather than trying to force a connection immediately, he had to meet him where he was at. A heartwarming example of this is the scene where Hunter refuses to walk home with him from school, so instead, Travis chooses to give him space and walks on the other side of the street, mimicking his movements. Hunter doing the same. A bittersweet moment that slowly gains his trust without being too overbearing. However, these healthy boundaries would eventually come crumbling when his brother's wife, Anne, moved by sympathy for a father she believes is finally trying to be present in his son's life, reveals key information about Jane, Travis's estranged wife. And this is where the motive quietly shifts. Travis begins planning to track her down. Without the permission of Walt or Anne, the only parents Hunter has ever known, Travis takes him out of state on a road trip to scope out the bank, convinced he's doing the right thing by reconnecting the boy with his mother. On paper, the intentions sound good, reuniting a child with his biological mother after years of separation caused by a violent broken marriage. But the problem isn't his intentions, but rather the way he goes about it. He makes the decision without the consent of his adoptive parents, deciding what's best for everyone else without involving them. This is Travis constructing his own version of what he believes is making things right. It's a clear sign of his past behavior resurfacing, trying to force his way back into Jane's life. What makes this especially heartbreaking is Hunter's compliance in joining him on this road trip. He wanted a relationship with his father so deeply that he trusted him without question. At Travis's request, Hunter calls his parents to let him know he wasn't coming home, suddenly removed from the only parents he had ever known.
Tell me where you are, Hunter. Just tell me where you are.
Hang up. Bye, Mom. Gotta go now.
Hunter!
Travis's old obsessive controlling behavior is in full effect when he commits to the plan, tracking Jane down and following her to her place of work, a hotel-themed peep show booth. This brings us to the beginning of the unraveling.
We get our first look at Jane here in this iconic three-quarter shot. Jane asks, "Do you mind if I sit?" Travis breaks his silence by simply answering no. I believe Travis barely responds to any of the opening questions to test the room. What happens when he withholds himself completely? Will Jane fill the space? It's a moment of self-measurement.
In response to this lack of enthusiasm, Jane reassures who she believes to just be a nervous first-time customer of the one-way mirror setup, explaining that he can see her, but she can't see him, establishing a controlled but comfortable distance. One thing to note right off bat is the color palette. Jane's side of the room is well lit and inviting. She sits upright in the center of the frame, appearing very confident. Jane comes off as someone who survived what happened to her and learned to exist in her new role. Travis's side is the complete opposite. He sits slouched over with the camera showing only one side of his face, keeping him from being fully readable. We don't get a clean frontal view of him the way we do with Jane. He's still withholding himself. As the silence stretches on and becomes increasingly uncomfortable, Jane does what she's learned to do the best in this line of work. Maybe the problem is simply that he hasn't gotten what he paid for yet. Maybe the way to get him to open up is to lean further into the performance.
Just take off my sweater.
No, don't. Please leave it on.
Travis insists Jane keep the sweater on because he needs the interaction to remain meditated. So by ordering her to keep it on, he tries to reimpose a boundary. He doesn't want a customer-worker exchange because that is not the relationship with Jane he knows how to inhabit. It's an attempt to make the encounter legitimate.
I don't want anything.
Well, why'd you come here then?
I want to talk to you.
"I don't want anything" reads less as truth and more as positioning. It's an identity claim, a way of separating himself from the man he used to be without naming that man directly. Or perhaps the sort of man that would normally join Jane in this call. But when confronted with the obvious fact that if he didn't want anything, he wouldn't be here, he admits he wants to talk, as it is the smallest, safest admission of need, carefully chosen because it sounds human without requiring exposure. We get the first view of how Jane's side of the one-way mirror looks, as Travis lashes out about how the women working here still must make money on the side by going home with the customers, though being forbidden to do so.
We're not allowed to have any outside relationships with the customers.
Yeah, but you can really see them if you want to, can't you? I mean, you can go home with them if you want to. All these places say that. I mean, how much extra money do you make? How much money do you make on the side?
I'm sorry, sir. I think you'll maybe want to talk to one of the other girls. I'll see if I can find one for you.
No.
No! Please.
As Jane begins to leave the room after clearly being uncomfortable with this very unusual call, Travis apologizes and reassures her she is the only one he'd like to talk to. As we can see, he begins to tear up, though clearly quite selfishly, as the apology is not remorseful, but an attempt to rewrite himself as someone who could have behaved differently. But timing matters. The apology comes as she exits, what shows it's not only performative, but ill-timed. He puts the phone down while making sure not to end the call, which is literal and symbolic for keeping the conversation open.
Despite her clear discomfort with Travis's demeaning questions, as if she's still obligated to some form of loyalty to him, or as if her work requires moral justification, not only this, but when she laughs at the absurdity of his question, she immediately corrects herself and apologizes for doing so, when he sternly demands to know why she's laughing, as if it's something she's learned to do to soften his reactions.
All you do is just talk.
Well, yeah.
What else do you do? Why are you laughing?
Sorry. I'm sorry.
For a brief moment, she shuts down in shame. We get one of the saddest examples of old patterns reappearing, with Jane shrinking herself again. Travis's anger resurfacing causes her to slip back into a familiar role, patient and forgiving, taking his outbursts without much of a fight. She sits right back down in the chair, ready to listen and take it again.
I know how hard it is to talk to strangers sometimes. Relax and tell me what's on your mind. I'll listen. I don't mind listening. I do it all the time.
Jane has learned that her value in this space and in her past relationships comes from being patient, from absorbing other people's feelings, making herself smaller so others can unload onto her. And Travis, whether he realizes it or not, is taking advantage of that instinct all over again. It's also tragic because she's extending grace to someone she assumes to be a stranger, when in reality, it's that very man who abused her. She's offering the same grace that likely kept her trapped in their marriage before.
So we've established Travis comes to the hotel booth not to procure sex or facts, but to practice being a person who can ask to be liked. I believe Travis is practicing a version of himself, testing phrases and using moral framing because he's ashamed of who he was and terrified of being rejected. At the same time, his breaks in control, like when he begins to cry on the other side of the mirror, are evidence of real trauma. Truly an amazing scene. This is the first decisive shift Travis makes in the booth. By turning away, Travis removes himself as the object of sympathy. He isn't watching her react and isn't calibrating his words for forgiveness. He tells the story as it was.
You'd yell at her and break things in the trailer.
The trailer.
Up until then, Jane is still operating in customer mode. But when Travis mentions the trailer, something changes. Up until that point, his story had stayed almost vague enough that he could have been describing almost any couple. The most descriptive he'd been was mentioning a guy who was a bit rough around the edges with a younger wife. But that single word trailer stands out just enough to crack the professional tone she's been trying to keep up. For just a second, it feels like she's right on the edge of recognition, but not fully admitting to herself yet who this familiar voice might be, she allows him to continue the story without interruption.
Excuse me, sir, but were you to visit me the other day?
No.
This is a defensive reflex. It's a brief reach for the old strategy of disappearance.
One night, she told him that she was pregnant.
This is the point of no return. The baby forces the story into an ethical register Travis can no longer manage rhetorically, destabilizing Jane's emotional response and confirms the story has crossed from rehearsal into consequence.
He was convinced that she loved him now because she was carrying his child.
As Travis describes Jane's pregnancy announcement, he frames it as a turning point where he finally becomes responsible, claiming to have held a steady job and given up on drinking. But what gives away that the dynamic hadn't actually improved was the logic behind it. This so-called good phase is still built on possession. If Jane was pregnant, she could be tied to him forever, and not just by a cowbell, as we would learn would be his preferred method of trapping Jane in the house. This pregnancy, alongside the instability of their relationship, had a huge impact on Jane's mental state. Travis describes her as becoming irritated with everything, unsatisfied and angry.
From the day the baby was born, she began to get irritated with everything around her.
While Travis may have viewed this pregnancy as a lock that confirmed her love for him, for Jane, this pregnancy had represented the loss of her own self-identity. Realistically, Jane was likely suffering from postpartum depression, but his interpretation of her anger was misguided. She didn't just get mean out of nowhere. This had been building up for a long time. Being married to a man who constantly drinks, breaks things around the house, accuses her of infidelity while staying out late himself to try to make her jealous. She viewed this family they made as a prison sentence. Travis eventually admits that his paranoia completely took over the relationship. Convinced Jane was going to leave him, he started to control her movements in bizarre ways, going back to the cowbell, tying one to her ankle so he'd hear if she tried to sneak out during the night. One evening, Jane managed to muffle the sound of the bell and slipped outside, but Travis caught her and dragged her right back into the trailer. In one of the most disturbing parts of the story, he admits that he left her tied up to the stove with his belt before carelessly going to sleep. When he woke up, the trailer was on fire, and Jane and the baby were gone. Travis describes her reoccurring dream of escaping from him, running naked down the highway. This was her fantasy of stripping herself from the labels and responsibilities their marriage gave her, to no longer have to be a wife or mother. In her mind, she was already gone. She was just waiting for her body to catch up.
He caught her, dragged her back to the trailer, tied her to the stove with his belt, and went back to bed and lay there listening to her scream. Then he listened to his son scream. He didn't feel anything anymore. All he wanted to do was sleep. And for the first time, he wished he were far away, lost in a deep, vast country where nobody knew him.
This is the most revealing admission Travis makes. Not the act, but the absence of feeling afterward. He's confessing the collapse of the identity that once justified it. Wanting to be far away is the genuine break from the man in the story.
And when he woke up, he was on fire. He ran through the flames toward the only two people he loved, but they were gone. Then he ran. He never looked back at the fire. He just ran.
When Travis describes waking up on fire, he's describing the literal end of their life together. But for Jane, that fire was the catalyst for a total identity erasure. It was the moment her survival instinct finally overrode her guilt. The fire burned away the mother and the wife role she was burdened to carry. She never bothered to look back because that meant facing the person who she was forced to be in that trailer.
Travis.
The third person ends here. Turning back to face Jane marks Travis's acceptance of recognition before he's ready for it, even before she can fully see him.
I wanted to see him so bad that I didn't even dare imagine him anymore. Anne kept sending me pictures of him until I asked her to stop. I didn't want to use him to fill all my emptiness.
Jane is self-aware of her avoidant trauma. By leaving Hunter with Walt, she's performing a mercy abandonment so that Hunter wouldn't have to grow up in the shadow of her resentment for his father. Over time, Travis's face faded until she couldn't picture him anymore. Jane describes the progress of her grief through her senses. First, she could smell him. Then, she could see him in her room, even confessing that she hears his voice in every man. By working at a peep show, she's essentially putting herself in a controlled re-exposure therapy session every day. She listens to men's desires and secrets, but she can't see them. She projects Travis onto all of them, but she's safe behind the glass. Jane had asked Anne to stop sending pictures of Hunter because she couldn't stand the pain of seeing him grow up and missing it. The moment Travis informs her that he brought their son with him and gives her the information to the hotel room, her emptiness finally cracks, challenged by a sudden grounded reality.
Room 1520.
I could hear you. I could see you, smell you. Now I'm working here. I hear your voice all the time. Every man has your voice.
Jane has made her living from a world of imagined conversations. Hunter and Travis showing up forces her to step back into physical reality, the same way Travis did when he left the desert. Her emotional breakdown isn't just about seeing Travis, but she realizes that she can no longer hide behind the glass. The fire was a flight from both her abusive husband and her responsibilities as a mother. This second waking up in the booth is the return to real life, and resuming the roles that she thought she laid to rest. When Travis asks her to turn the light off so she can see him, the performance ends, and the real Jane begins. By turning off the light so she can see through the other side of the glass, She collapses the 4-year distance between her trauma, being Travis, and her current life. She stops being the voice in the box and has to finally face the wreckage of her real life. The decision to go through with reuniting with Hunter at the hotel is her finally quitting the escape she began on the night of the fire. In the end, Jane's journey isn't just about reconnecting with her son, but finding the courage to stop living as a ghost. By stepping out of the shadows of that booth, she's finally choosing the messy, painful weight of motherhood over the safety of her own emptiness, over a life spent sitting in a booth, reassuring people of their own problems, always being the understanding one who always compromises for others. Jane finally stops being a reflection in someone else's eyes and becomes the protagonist of her own survival. The fire that started in that trailer 4 years ago was finally out.
In the first booth scene, Travis cannot fully inhabit the encounter. His posture reflects unresolved shame and unwillingness to acknowledge the damage he caused, or to risk being seen by the person most affected by it. He speaks sparingly, controlling the terms of the interaction, and keeps emotional distance through silence and imposing rules. Even his moralizing about the other women functions as a stabilizer, a way to frame the situation ethically without locating responsibility in himself. These constraints let him remain present without being exposed. In the later booth scene, those rules disappear. Travis no longer manages distance or outcome. He tells the story of their marriage with direct acknowledgement of his obsession, mistrust, and control. Afterward, he doesn't seek absolution or reintegration. Instead, he arranges Jane's reunion with their son and removes himself. This is the film's ethical shift. Travis moves from guarding himself against guilt to accepting responsibility without the expectation of forgiveness, a quiet, decisive act of moral clarity.
In the end, Paris, Texas doesn't offer us the comfort of a restored family. It offers us the cold reality of a successful exit. Travis's final act of reuniting his son with his mother and driving off into the night was a quiet surrender to the fact that he is the poison in the well. He realizes that the only way he could continue to protect the people he loved was to stay lost, a ghost in the desert that could never hurt anyone again.
You belong together with your mother, but I can't stay with you. I could never heal up what happened. That's just the way it is.
It's a heartbreaking realization that no amount of confession or making things right can ever actually undo the horrible things that happened in that trailer. To accept that you are the reason for someone else's pain and that you can never make it right before deciding to leave, it's a pretty devastating story. Obviously, this film is nowhere near as dark as most I've covered, but it was worth the cover due to its emotional weight, and it's been a long time in the making, like very long. I want to give a big shout out to Finn Edwards for recommending this film and contributing his perspective on Travis for this video. His channel will be linked in the description for you to check out more of his film reviews. As usual, this video will be uploaded to Rumble. I really appreciate your patience while I finish out this semester, and I hope to see you again very soon with a lot more videos. I'm going stupid this summer, trust me.